Everyone. Gives me great pleasure this evening to introduce our speakers, Dr. Anjali Duhan Gulia. Dr. Gulia is a fellow at the Indian Institute of Advanced Study in Shimla. And of course, I'm going to say right now, I always feel a bit sorry for our Indian speakers who very kindly offer to speak to us, but of course it's midnight there. And not only is it midnight, but Dr. Gulia is in Shimla, well over 2,000 meters, so it must be very cold in February. So thank you very much for accepting the invitation. Dr. Gulia teaches history of art at the Department of Visual Arts at Maharishi Dayanand University in Haryana, as well as being a fellow in Shimla. And she took her PhD from the School of Arts and Aesthetics at Jawaharlal Nehru University. And it was during that, when she was working on her PhD, which was on the spiritual goals of the Nats and their aesthetic manifestations in Mughal culture. It was then that she got in touch with me and asked me to help her on certain aspects of it. And it was a great pleasure to work with her. There's nothing I like more than the material culture of the yogi traditions. So working with her on that was fantastic. And of course, she produced a great thesis. She's and yes, she was working under Professor Naman Ahuja as her supervisor, and also working a bit with Robert Skelton, who any of you know about Mughal miniatures, is a great sort of doyen of the subject here in the UK. And she's currently working on a Mughal manuscript of a text called the Dwadas Bhau, which is a translation of a Sanskrit text, but she's kindly reverted to her work on the Nats to speak to us, to speak to the Centre of Yoga Studies this evening. And she's going to be talking to us about the Ramta Nat, so the wandering Nat yogi in the Sampradaya and in paintings. So over to you, Dr. Gulia. Thank you very much again for speaking to us. Oh, we can't hear you. I can't hear you.
Is it better now?
Yep.
Am I audible?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Perhaps it was turned off in the middle. So thank you, Dr. Mallinson, for those kind words. And I'm truly delighted to be presenting my work here. And before I start, I should formally say early good morning to all of you from India, from the snow-capped Himalayas, where I am here presently, as Dr. Mallinson mentioned, and a good evening to those of you joining from London and from other parts of European countries of Europe. The title of my paper today is the Ramta Nat in the Sampradaya and Paintings. I'm truly delighted to present my work at such a significant platform before such learned audience. For this, I'm deeply thankful to Dr. Mallinson. Thank you, sir, for giving me this opportunity. I'm presenting portions from my PhD today, and I'm floating these ideas to get valuable and critical feedback before its final publication. Another thing I must admit is that I'm sorry to not being able to attend all the lectures present in this series live, mainly due to the odd hours these are presented in India, and also because of various personal and professional commitments. However, I had made a point to listen to the recordings of talks by Dr. Deborah Diamond, Dr. Mallinson, Mr. Amol Bankar, Dr. Vijay Sarte, Dr. Linda Hess, and more recent ones by the on the Bengali Nath literature by Professor Lubomir Onreka, and on alchemy by Dr. Dagmar Vuestik. I hope I am pronouncing her name correctly. I will engage with some of these ideas here, their ideas here.
I've lost your sound again, Anjali. I don't know if you can hear me.
I think you pressed the mute button.
Is it?
There we are.
Fine now? Yeah. And is it? Can you see my screen now? Okay. So start this slideshow. Yeah. Right at the outset, I would like to discuss the structure of this paper. It focuses on the Ramta Nath, who were and are wandering members of the Nath Sampradaya, and the historical shifts in their identity in the sect. The main part of this research will explore the two groups which had or have a membership of these Naths, the Dhajpanti yogis and the Bhartrhari yogis or Bairagis, and their possible depiction in Mughal miniatures. These wandering renunciates, especially Bhartrhari yogis from whom they trace their origin, play musical instruments, and sing popular cyclic songs or ballads of Nath Siddhas and also Hindu deities. Another body of the Nath pantheon, which is formed of itinerant ascetics, is the Jamaat. Literally, a congregate body will also be briefly discussed. Holding a powerful position in the Sampradaya, the Jamaat attends significant Nath festivals in order to strengthen the collective Nath ascetic identity. The second concern of this talk is to discuss the presence of the ideals of bhakti in the Sampradaya. The Naths have primarily been viewed through the lens of the yogi and seldom the bhogi. With respect to bhakti, they are projected as the demonized other, along with the shaks and the powerful voices of the sants. I, however, argue that possibly the Brathari Bairagis in the form of Ramtanath Bairagi / Jogi present the ideals of bhakti in the Sampradaya. Some of it we will previously discuss while talking about these itinerant ascetics. Here, I will focus on their presence in a few paintings from the 17th century Mughal manuscript, the Rajkuvar, and other Mughal paintings to support my arguments. This material is supplemented by my fieldwork in the Gorakhpur and Masnath monasteries. Therefore, my work today draws from the medieval period texts and Mughal paintings, 20th century Naths, and contemporary species which belong to them. One last thing before we start in my presentation, you will find at some places the text is in red font, or on some paintings there is a red rectangle placed on a figure or an object. With respect to its presence in the text, I think these are interesting areas which we need to discuss deeply as a community working on medieval aesthetical traditions. In the paintings, these are problem areas in that particular painting, and I will need your valuable feedback, advice, or help in reading them correctly. So thank you, and let's start. In the Nath Sampradaya, the itinerant ascetics are called Ramta. The epistemological root of this word is Ram, which means to be engrossed or take pleasure. Therefore, Ramta may denote the one who is engrossed in his religion or in the quest of their God or Jivan Mukti. As is the case with yogi, this term is also not exclusively used for the Naths, but is shared by other ascetic groups. For instance, the Ramanandis call their itinerants as Ramta, Ramte Ram. The first group of Naths we will explore today mainly in paintings is the Dhwajpanthi or the Dhwajnath Panthi. The Dhwajpanthi yogis are believed to carry a flag or a banner and are therefore named as Dhaj, most likely a corrupted form of the word Dhwaj. Briggs, however, refutes this belief on the account of his interviews at Tila. So, another possibility is that perhaps this Panth began from a leader named Dhwajnath, after whom it was named as Dhwajnath Panth and subsequently Dhwaj Panth. The first known reference to these peripatetic ascetics is a 1063 Common Era inscription present on the wall of the Amreshwar temple Mandhata in Madhya Pradesh and mentions a Pashupat with the name as Gandhadhwaj, which ends with Dhwaj, pointing to a probable origin of these Nath yogis from the Pashupat sect. Amol Bankar has recorded several inscriptions and references to these yogis from the 15th century onwards, suggesting that they covered a wide area of the country for their pilgrimages. The Nujum al-Ul manuscript, the Star of the Sciences, which was produced in Bijapur in 1570s, also enlists this sect as Dhajpanthi or number 5. They also belong to the list of 12 yogins presented by Taranath from the same 16th century, and where they are mentioned as Dhwajpanthin. They are believed to belong to the group of Shiv in the mythical battle between the Nath yogis of Shiv and Gorakhnath. Further, it is believed that their group was founded by Birbank Nath Hanuman. At Tila, Briggs was informed that these Dhajpanthis are found in Sri Lanka. He further declares that members of this group are all foreigners. Yogi Vilasnath, however, records that presently these sadhus are in Ambala in Haryana state. They are peripatetic ascetics who play veena and sing songs associated with the Nath sect and Shiv. He asserts their relationship with both Bhakti and Shakti and adds that their main aim is to popularize the Nath sect and yoga. They have a right to become the abbots of the monasteries and other Nath related buildings. However, I did not find any Dhajpanthi yogis in the Tila Jogia in Ambala. The Ambala yogis belong to the Nateshwari Panth, to which Tirathnath, Brahmnath, and Krishnanath, the gurus of Budgupta Nath, belonged, and perhaps both Budgupta Nath and the Guru and the Taranath also had their affiliations with this group in the 16th century. Tusi records that the Nateshwari yogins were not part of the 12 groups and were most strictly Buddhist. However, in the contemporary times, Nateshwari yogis are present in the Yogi Mahasabha's list of 12 Nath Panths as follows of Daryanathi and have a distinct Shiv identity where they associate themselves with the Nataraj Roop of Shiv. We'll keep on referring to this list again and again today. Now returning back to the Dhajpanthis, they have an establishment in Biawar, Rajasthan. However, they are involved in the practices of exorcism, similar to the ones practiced at the temple of Mahendrapur Balaji, dedicated to Hanuman, and they are not respected now amongst the Sampradaya. Nonetheless, Amol Bankar's research proves that these yogis were active in the sect right till the 18th century. Now I'll try to examine their presence in the Mughal paintings. We tend to read Dhwaj only as a flag, but both the Sanskrit and Marathi dictionaries gives us additional meanings of it in the form of an ensign, a banner. So in this latter context, I see some of the Naths carrying a banner of sorts in the miniatures. Whether we can call these ascetics as Dhajpanthis could be a matter of further discussion in the end. So the first folio is from the Khamsa of Nizami, from the British Library. The Sasanian king Behram here is being carried away by a Simurgh. Dharam Das, its painter, has however paid more attention to the lively rural landscape below. Amidst it is painted the wandering Nath ascetic, dressed in a cloak and a langot, carrying a banner in one hand and a portly and a stick in another. Although he's not wearing a shringi, but the fact that he's accompanied by a dog hair in his journey suggests that he's a Nath. The other painting is from a folio from Akbarnama, Victorian Albert Museum, Akbarnama, which depicts the rejoicings at the birth of Salim, where two Naths are painted on the right corner below, seeking alms. The identity becomes clear because one of them has a shringi around his neck and the other one is wearing a necklace with silk ribbons around his shoulders. These are possibly Dhajpanthis holding a banner. Now the Baburnama has some fascinating visual imagery related to the Naths with reference to Babur's visit to Gorakh Khatri, documenting some significant rites and the everyday lives of these Nath yogis. Two of these folios are preserved in the British Library and one is present in the collection of the Walters Art Museum. The most recent one, which have come to light in an article by Dr. James Millinson, is this one. On the bottom right corner is a Nath standing in a convoluted pose where his feet are facing towards the yogi standing before him. However, the body covered with the robe is completely painted, facing the figure, the viewer, and then the face is in the middle. He is wearing a large shringi and perhaps two rudraksh berries are also tied to his thread. And in his proper right hand, he is carrying a banner. Similarly, in a well-known and often published Mughal painting of a group of Naths ascribed to Masood from 1630s-40s, preserved in the British Library again, on the left an ascetic carries a banner in his proper hand raised above his head. So these are four examples of some other paintings which also have these Naths carrying these banners. Are these the Dhajpanthis carrying their ensign raised above their heads as a symbol of respect for it? Or one can argue that these depictions can be of the hand-held fans, the pankha carried by these yogis to comfort themselves in the hot Indian temperatures. But wherever these yogis are depicted carrying these banners, they are never held upside down or pointing towards the ground. So I would want to believe that perhaps the Mughal painters here have captured the Dachpantis in their creative spaces, but I may be wrong, and we can discuss it later. Now, perhaps central to the role of diffusion of the Nath ideologies in the medieval period, the Panth of Dutch Panthis in the contemporary times remain outside the rubric of the Bara Panth of the Nath pantheon, as seen from this list here. In the Nath sect, the epitome of Vairagya is represented by the legendary figure of the Raja Bhartrhari. In the 15th century Sanskrit play by Harihar, Bhartrhari Nirved, Bhartrhari, who is believed to be the founder of the Vairagya group, Panth, presents the ideals of the Bairagi or Vairagi, who deserts his blissful household life full of material and emotional comforts. He has realized the impermanence of everything, since in his despair or enlightenment, he has renounced the world and resolved to remain faithful to his vow. Taranath also records them in the list of 12 groups as Vairagi Panthin. These Bhartrhari Bairagis or Jogis, as they are addressed in the vernaculars, play musical instruments and sing devotional songs in the honor of Bhartrhari, Supreme Lord Niranjan, and other Nath heroes. They were instrumental in connecting different cultural and linguistic regions and circulated the knowledge of yoga. Legends of Nath heroes like Bhartrhari, Gopi Chand, Puran Bhagat, Raja Guga Pir, and the romances. These legends sung with the aid of a veena, sarangi, or an ektara, originated from the soil and often had the hero in most cases was supported and converted into the Nath cult by Gorakhnath, conquered death that is equivalent to attaining immortality and rejection of sensual pleasures. These folk ballads were given utmost importance as they were and still are considered of protective nature, and their singing continued for months. They were present in great numbers in the plains of North India, and several scholars have studied them, suggesting that they stood at the crossroads of being a Ramta Vairagi and the Grahast group. Catherine Champion has studied them in the areas around the Gorakhpur Math in Uttar Pradesh in 1995, and she has stated that the Nath Jogis of Bengal, as noted by Professor Lubimir Ondreka, the Gorakhpur Bairagis or Jogis also came from the weaver community known as Julaha in the vernacular. These are hereditary renouncers and yet live a household life adhering to both Shaivism and Islam. As Muslims, they observe the 5 basic Islamic duties, celebrate Muslim festivals, and take gifts on Eid. On the other hand, after a rudimentary initiation, often by their own fathers, they also become a part of the Nath Sampradaya. Therefore, they are the most Islamicized Gorakhnathis. As a Nath householder, they live in their village leading the life of a weaver or cultivator, often landless. Like the Nath householders of Rajasthan, they are also called upon as professional musicians and singers on special religious and secular occasions where they play sarangi and sing songs in honor of Gorakhnath and Shiv. They are often employed as landless laborers in the farm, but their itinerant status come to the forefront when they are no longer needed on the farms. Then they assume the garb of a Nath, wearing ochre robes and its associated paraphernalia. During this time of no fixed work, they visit places sacred to the Naths, Muslims, and the ones which are sacred to both groups. Apart from singing, they also perform the role of a healer when providing people with talismans on the way. However, during my field trip in the region, I found that their numbers are fast diminishing, and I could not find any Ramta Bairagi in the Gorakhpur city. Some of the older ones were present in the neighboring villages, especially in the areas of Maharajganj and Sant Kabir Nagar, but the younger generation does not pursue this lifestyle. Another interesting aspect which I noted in their relationship with the Gorakhpur Math is very complex. These Bhartrhari Bairagis or Jogis are prohibited from entering the monastery, not on the account that they are Muslim yogis, but because they are householders. I found that most of the construction work done in the monastery is undertaken by the skilled Muslim masons. Moreover, in the Sanskrit higher secondary school present in the premises of this monastery, presently several Muslim students are studying different branches of Sanskrit and other modern subjects, but these yogis are still barred from entering the monastery, chastised on the grounds that they consume meat and liquor and are considered charlatans and beggars. The old singers are invited to special festivals organized by the government and university functions in the state, and there they sing songs from their usual repertoire of legends of the Nath Siddhas. But I have noted that they have made innovations in the basic texts of these cycles of the Nath legends so that they conform to Islamic Sufism. I'm sure in the previous times their influence was so great and widespread that the sons actually had to use the Nath yogis symbols and language to increase their own base. This can be substantiated by examining the case of Kabir, who according to the brilliant scholarship by Charlotte Woodville and Linda Hess appears so heavily indebted to the Nath Panthi form of yoga that his sayings can hardly be understood without references to it. Both Kabir and these ascetics are present in an interesting painting here. The Ramta Vairagi here is wearing a shringi on the left, proper left, and is holding a musical instrument which appears like a sarangi. Now behind him there is another figure playing another musical instrument, and I am unable to identify the instrument. This painting is preserved in the Center of Reserve Collection, Edinburgh. Perhaps it's a later period mirror image of a similar composition painted probably by Mir Kalan Khan, preserved now in the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Now both the Edinburgh and the Metropolitan painting affiliates from the lower section of another well-known miniature supposedly produced in the atelier of Dara Shikoh. So this, oh, I've got so many details. The complete painting depicts a gathering of the Sufis in Ajmer at the tomb of Muinuddin Chishti between 1650 to 1655 AD. The interesting part here is the depiction of the 12 influential Hindu saints, all identified in Persian in the bottom section of the painting. Amongst this group are present Matsyendranath and Matsyendranath identified as Pir Machandar, vernacular name of Matsyendranath, and Gorakh. They both of these are second depictions of both of them in the Mughal miniatures. The identification of Matsyendranath as a Pir, a title used by a Sufi saint and also used for the Nath, suggests that in the previous times they shared a conjugal bond. Now, how the late Mughal master Mir Kalan Khan, who was based in Awadh, chose to project the two Nath ascetics, Matsyendranath and Gorakhnath, famous for their yogic knowledge in the field. Playing musical instruments in a group headed by Kabir is exciting. Perhaps he laid upon them the identity of the Brathari Bairagi Jogi, whom he could see around wandering in the regions of Awadh in his contemporary times. Now we come to another group, which is the Hindu, I mean, in inverted commas, Brathari Bairagi. Now the Yogi Mahasabha website presents we go to this, website presents a list of Bara Panth, the 12 groups which the Sampradaya has. A group significant for us here is the Vairagi Panthin, belonging to the Brathari Vairag and also called Brathari Yogis. This should not be confused with the above discussed Ramta Vairagi Jogi from Gorakhpur, but these are distinct. Whatever I have gathered from the yogis of this group, they come from exclusively Hindu background, are sthandhari, which is living in monasteries and taking care of their storehouses as kotharis. They are neither associated with any peripatetic lifestyle nor play any musical instruments. Now we come to the Jamaat. The status or role of living an itinerant life and reinforcing the identity of the Sampradaya, which was perhaps carried forward by the Dhajpantis and Brathari Bairagis, is handed over to the Jamaat now, which is having a fluid population of approximately 100. It has two heads, the Gadi number 18 and the Gadi number 12. This refers to a tradition in the Sampradaya in which it is believed that there were formerly 18 groups of Shiv and 12 of Gorakhnath. These groups went to war against each other in order to establish the supremacy of their leaders. Both the protagonists later destroyed some of their punts in order to settle the unending disputes amongst them. The remaining 12 groups of the two sects constitute the order of the Nath Yogis. With reference to Jamaat, the former is the seat of 18th sect of Shiv, and head of Gadi number 18 now is Yogi Sevanath. The seat number 12 refers to the 12 sects of Gorakh, and his head is Yogi Krishnanath now. Their tutelary deity is Shiv as a Yogi Adinath, and also noted by Dr. Surde in Maharashtra. The silver image they carry also had the tiny figures of Shiv's son Kartikeya and Ganesh, suggesting the sect's contemporary bent towards classical Hinduism. Also, they compulsorily set up a dhuni wherever they camp. The Jamaat has a membership of all the 12 panths, and each member has a specific role assigned to them, which is similar to his position in the Sampradaya. For example, all the Mahants who sit on the Gaddis, they come from the I Panth. Earlier, the ascetics associated with Jamaat had to walk long distances. However, now they use personal vehicles like trucks, buses, and comfortable cars for the Mahants. And because of this, the Jamaat attends and oversees the organizing of significant Nath festivals. Dr. Mallinson has noted the important centers of the itinerary, but they also visit all the minor centers of the way, and hosting the Jamaat at his stela, samad, or establishment or monastery is considered an important um, activity and a matter of pride for any head of these establishments. Now, at this stage, I want to bring in the lens of bhakti in the sampradaya. The Naths are always seen as the yogi and bhogi and considered as the other in the realm of bhakti. But I would like to argue here that these Brathari Vairagis, in the form of Ramta Nath, Vairagi Jogi, present the ideals of bhakti in the sampradaya. For that, we have to return back to the peripatetic Brathari Bairagis, who in the contemporary times don't bear such respectable character and are completely left out in the power hierarchy in the Sampradaya. Perhaps earlier these Bairagi yogis held key positions when they had enjoyed the patronage of small Rajput and Muslim princes on account of their double religious affiliations and their singing and musical talents and much popularity amongst the masses. These wandering ascetics, holding their musical instruments and singing the songs of God, attracted the fantasy of many medieval period authors who presented them as lead heroes of their romances, like Maulana Daud's Chandayan, Sheikh Qutban's Prigavati, Malik Muhammad Jaisi's Padmavat, and Manjan's Madhumalati. The Rajkuvar is the first and the only Mughal version of one of these Premakhyans. It is a Persian translation of the Mrigavati. It is through the discussion of three of the paintings of this manuscript and some portions of the Avdi and its translation in Persian. I will try to pinpoint the devotionalism of the Ramta Bairagi for his god. Before we start, let's briefly go through the yogi's paraphernalia mentioned in the Mrigavati Navdi. It includes sandals, girdle, patched cloak, mated locks, discus, the earrings, the necklace for telling his prayers, the staff, the begging bowl, and the loin skin, yogi's cloak, the basil beads, the armrest, and the trident, body rubbed with ashes, horn, whistle, and ascetic's viol. The heroes of these Ravdi romances all don the yogi's garb with varied thoroughness. This is also supported by the recent research by Dr. Mallinson on the yogi insignia present in these Avdi Premakhyan, where he has examined the Chandayan, Mrigavati, and Padmavat. Perhaps the only element of their belongings which makes them different from the other yogis performing Hatha Yoga is the kingri, the ascetic's viol. I have found that Abul Fazl records a string musical instrument named Kinger in his section on Sangeet in the Aine Akbari, and explains it briefly as it resembles the veena but has two strings of gut and smaller gourds. With respect to its use by the Naths, previous to the instruments mentioned in these Premakhyan, Dr. Mallinson has noted that some 14th century sculptures from Panhale Kaji do carry stringed instruments, and one of them clearly holds a kingri. It is important because the Bhrathari Bairagis also play musical instruments like the sarangi or iktara. We see in this and all other paintings from this manuscript, the Mughal painters have chosen to consistently paint the ash-rubbed body, cloak, and the kingri in all the miniatures, presenting the prince as the wandering ascetic in a naturalistic manner. It is highly unlikely that the Mughal painters of the early 17th century had the painted versions of the Chandayan yogi before them, on which they modeled their wandering protagonist. Also, this text was not painted for Akbar in Agra. So the painters accompanying the rebuilt Prince Salim also had no previous version of these ascetics from their own time. The narrative of Mrigavati attracted the attention of Salim at Allahabad Fort at Sangam, where he perhaps encountered the oral versions of this story, quite possibly from a Nath Bairagi. So it is likely that the Mughal painters had based their visual imagery on their observation of real wandering Naths. While illustrating their bhakti and yogic qualities, artists not only following the cue set up by the authors, they followed but also observing these yogis laid much emphasis to the spiritual guides as Nath Gurus. Their suffering and willingness to die become tropes. The journey of the yogi, or the ways in which artists and writers set up the union of man and woman as well as man and divine and so on. Additionally, we cannot ignore the influence of the written word. The insignia in each case also depended upon the requirements of the ascetic in that episode. For example, the yogi is depicted with discusses where he used them to sever the seven heads of the demon. The narrative in both Avdi and Persian is about a young prince of Chandragiri, the moon mountain, who fell in love with the lovely princess of Kanchanpur, the gold city, suggesting the sun station, named Mrigavati, who enticed the prince by turning into a doe. The prince, even called Rajkuvar, managed to capture her by hiding her magic sari when she was having a bath. After 5 months of staying together, Mrigavati leaves the prince's palace. Rajkuvar, who is heartbroken by Mrigavati's flight, took on the path of yoga. He decides he cannot traverse this difficult path of finding Mrigavati by employing the mundane resources. He has to wear the yogi's robe. As a Gorakhpanti Ramta Vairagi, he sets off to find Mrigavati. After facing a perilous journey where he faced death several times, he finally reached Kanchanpur and played the viol of separation. The whole town became troubled and Mrigavati called him to her palace. They recognize each other and finally are married. Eventually, Rajkuvar returns to his native Chandragiri along with Mrigavati and his other wife Rupman. Later, he died in a hunting expedition, and Mrigavati and the other queen committed sati on the funeral pyre of the king. The text is sprinkled with references to legendary Nath heroes and other lovers, as no one in this world has endured such sorrows. Nal didn't face such a grave condition, nor have we heard such a story about Bhrathari. However, there is little references to the yogic material in this text. Now, in order to understand the idea of bhakti in the paintings and text, I want to discuss a significant event in the Vairagi's perilous journey to meet his beloved, which is placed as a metaphor of God in the text. When he has entered the palace of the queen Mrigavati and sees her, he faints or collapses in a swoon before Mrigavati, who is enthroned and surrounded by maidservants in her golden palace, with male courtiers assembled in the foreground outside the walls. This episode, like a few others in this text, employs the simile of the sun and the moon to refer to Mrigavati. The Persian text states that there he saw her enthroned inside, surrounded by his female attendants, as the moon enthroned among all the stars, and fell down unconscious. Further, the text reads, he saw the graceful sun, Mrigavati, blazing forth there. While witnessing the glare of her beauty, the sun's matchless glare fell on the Kuvar. The fire of love overpowered him so much that he could not carry on walking even for half a step. The Kuvar fell down and fainted. The maids asked him, "Why did you fall down, unconscious in this way?" The yogi said, I cannot tell you the cause of my fainting, but I saw that which my body could not bear. As you can see, the Persian version on the screen is almost similar in emotions to the Avdi text I've just read. The scene presents a visual depiction of the passion and devotion of the protagonist towards the object of his devotion, the god. In his bhakti, he is completely engrossed in his devotion for the Guru and the God. Both are conflated in the image of Mrigavati here. He lives an itinerant life, covering arduous journeys. His passion for suffering, who sings in praise for his God, seeking ultimately the final union with the God. So when he receives the first vision, that is darshan of his deity, he is so empowered with his devotion that he faints. The perilous journey and falling of the Nath Vairagi before the heroine reflects the creation, longing, and final return of the soul and cosmos to the Supreme, like the bubbles arising and returning to waters. Initially, it was Adi Shankaracharya who had used the water bubble, Jal Budbuda, as the metaphor to explain the relationship between the Jeev and the Supreme Self. In these love stories, the hero disguised as the Nath Vairagi, when falls down before the heroine, is an indication of them being an integral part of their Supreme Self, the heroine. This episode was also repeated in Malik Muhammad Jaisi's Padmavat, where Ratan Sen fainted before Padmavati in the Shiv temple. As a theme, it is often repeated to specially illustrating the love story of Madhavanal and Kamakandala in the Indian miniatures from Mughal and Rajput ateliers. The childhood lovers are separated when they grow up. Young Brahmin Madhavanal was banished from his country by a ruler who was jealous of his youth and good looks. While exiled, he traveled in the garb of a peripatetic ascetic, met the beautiful Kamakandalana, who had now become a courtesan. But unlike the story of Chandai and Mrigavati, this story has a tragic ending where both the protagonists kill themselves. In the current scene from the story, Madhavanal is dressed as a Ramta and, like Rajkuvar, has collapsed in a swoon upon seeing her for the first time. This is a well-known painting by the Mughal painter Shivdas. Another one from the same atelier is by Dalchand. It's also a very famous painting. The theme is also repeated in a painting by Fateh Chand, who was perhaps a contemporary of Mir Chand at Lucknow around the middle of the 18th century. He has placed the figure in a composition formulated according to linear perspective. The celebrated Rajput painter Chokha at Mewar also creates his own version of this episode. The Rajput aesthetics are at play in this beautiful 18th century miniature. 3 out of these 4 representations of ascetics were distinct Nath imagery. So in the conclusion, I intend to partly engage with the talk of Professor Lubomir Onreka, who had raised some thought-provoking questions on the Bengali literature of the Naths and has argued that this literature should be identified as non-Naths because 2 written texts based on the lives of Gorakhnath and Gopichand and the oral narratives from that region have very little or negligible amount of information about the Hatha Yuga. I think his observations have directly put the spotlight on the identity of the Naths and are measures of deciding who is a Nath and what we constitute as belonging to the Naths. Does the Sampradaya include only the yogis performing Hatha Yoga practices? Is it only about yogic knowledge traditions? Does it include the Grahast or the Ramta? Both being ignored in the Sampradaya and sometimes in the scholarly circles too, despite having a pan-Indian presence. Alternatively, is the Nath Sampradaya only open to members who come from a Hindu background? Does the Sampradaya have a tradition of bhakti? Is the idea of a Nath and the members of this Sampradaya fixed? These are significant but complex questions. During the course of last 50 minutes or so, I have tried to answer some of these questions here. We have discussed the presence of the Ramta in the Sampradaya, and I intend to reiterate that the Nath Sampradaya always had the membership of the wandering ascetics, apart from the Sthandhari and Grahast Naths. We can document their presence from the 11th century onwards in engravings and from 15th century onwards in paintings. Through this brief study, we have also documented historical shifts in the membership of the Naths in the Bara Panth. Groups like the Dhajpanthis, who were once part of the Sampradaya, eventually lost their membership to other groups, which perhaps became more relevant in the contemporary times. This loss of prestige and value also happened with the Bhartrhari Bairagis studied here from Gorakhpur and surrounding areas, which once were the followers of Bhartrhari, were the most Islamicized Naths, and who perhaps influenced the creation of not only the fascinating Premakhyan texts in Avdi, but the beautiful imagery of the Chandayan, the Gavati Rajkuvar. But they subsequently fell out of favor and are rejected by the Sampradaya now. As told previously, the Yogis Mahasabha have their altered presence in their list of Bara Panth. Perhaps the Mahasabha does not want to lose a royal icon of the Sampradaya who had renounced his luxurious and blissful married life to become a Nath. But it presents these ascetics as categorically Hindu assigned to the position of storekeepers of their ministries, which suits their current concerns. This is true to several religious groups which once had affiliation or connection with the Nath Sampradaya in the past now stand outside the rubric of this Mahasabha, and some like the householders yogis in householder yogis in Kerala, Tamil Siddha lineages, tantrics from Birbhum, West Bengal, and Vajrayana Buddhist Naths in Darjeeling. These are groups noted by Dr. Mallinson in his recent article, and who, like the Bhartrhari Bairagis in their present situation, are also not acknowledged by the Yogi Mahasabha. However, historically, they have been instrumental in the genesis, survival, and progress of the Sampradaya and its present form. This suggests that the sect has some of its ideas as traditional and fixed, like the presence of Shiv as Adinath, the idea of Navnath, 84 Nath Siddhas, presence of a guru, division of the order into 12 groups. These are important definitive elements of this sect. Within these parameters, historically, the Naths reinvented themselves with change in time and space, forming or breaking identities and affiliations with several groups. These features of fluidity and adaptability within the sect have kept it relevant to different strata of the society at different times. In the recent times, it is clearly bending towards a more classical form of Hinduism. Another significant observation I intend to make here is that the Nath sect and some of its groups or members who are believed to be standing on the other side of the Bhakti ideals, especially in the medieval period, in fact were active participants. This talk explicates with the help of Bhartrhari Bairagi Jogis and a few of the paintings of Rajkuvar, depicting the Ramta Bairagi Gorakhnathi, who is deeply imbued in his bhakti for his guru and the god. The examination of the Rajkuvar from the Nath Bairagi lens allowed me to trace his ideals, an itinerant life covering arduous journeys, bhakti for the guru and the god, his passion for suffering, who sings in praise of his god, is willing to die in the process and seeks ultimately the final union. These have been successfully imbued in this text. Because of the scope of this talk, I was not able to discuss all of them here, but I have included some of them in my discussion about the movement of the Bhartrhari Bairagi from Gorakhpur, inside and outside of the life of a renouncer, and has compared their journey with the miniatures of Rajkuvar in my forthcoming article, which would soon be published by Bloomsbury Academic. So, in the acknowledgements, I want to express my deep gratitude to my mentor, my guru, Professor Naman Ahuja, who is a dean and who's the Dean School of Arts and Aesthetics, JNU, who supervised this research and has a significant guiding force behind my work. I also owe a lot to Mr. Robert Skelton, previously keeper of the Indian collection at the V&A, who shared with me his precious books and slides. This research draws heavily on the groundbreaking writings of Dr. James Mallinson on different aspects of the Nath sect. I am grateful to him for not only inviting me to the series of talks at SOAS, but more importantly for his scholarly insights on the subject and for his exemplary generosity in sharing valuable resources and articles with me. Mr. Amol Bankar, who shared his seminal research on the pilgrimage inscriptions of the Dhajpanthis with me. So thank you, Amol. A special thank you also goes to Dr. Elaine Wright, previously curator of the Islamic collections at the Chester Beatty Library. She has not only made my field trips to Dublin a smooth one, but also has uncomplainingly catered to my many requests for images and answered my lengthy queries regarding this manuscript. And finally, Dr. Balram Shukla, who had some thought-provoking conversations with me over this subject. In the end, I would like to thank Dr. Wildcraft and her wonderful team members, Ruth and Vicky, for conducting this talk seamlessly and providing me with all kinds of support so that I can only focus on my talk. So a big thank you to all of you. Last but not the least, I am thankful to my patient audience. If anyone has any questions or feedback, I would be happy to answer if we have time remaining. I'm sorry, I think I've stretched it further.
Not at all, not at all. Thank you so much, Dr. Gulia. That was really fantastic. Very clearly presented, and yeah, it was wonderful. Such rich imagery, and I always find it amazing how, both with text and images, when you every time you revisit them, you see new things, and you can ask different questions. And for example, it really made me think with the, I thought I'd sort of drained the subject looking at the different accoutrements of the yogi, the insignia and stuff, but then you showed all the pictures of the dhwaja, the banner, and I thought I'd never really stopped to think about that. There were 4, 5, 6, 7, and now I think about it, there are lots of these images
there
of
are
yogis
lots of them,
this dhwaja. So I've got a few questions, of course, but I was wondering about that. Do we see any other, since you've been looking out for them and I haven't, I was wondering, do you see any other characters in any miniature paintings carrying similar banners to that? Or are they exclusive to these Ramte?
I've seen many of them. They are usually of a round shape. The only size difference, the shape difference I could see in your Baburnama painting, usually they are mostly round and they are usually raised above the head. So that made me think possibly these are banners, because usually if there are pankhas or handheld fans, you can point them downwards, but these are always raised above the head. So,
my question, if I wasn't clear, was do you see any people other than yogis carrying these things? Is it a very specific?
Yes, sorry. Yeah, I have seen one miniature. It's a pastiche of 4 small paintings, and it's a part of a murakka, and one of the Ramanandi Yogini holds it.
Okay.
It's in the Berlin Museum. So
Yeah.
perhaps
Well,
like the Kengri or like the other insignia, these banners were also shared by as a symbol or as a insignia. It was shared by other groups as well. So,
okay,
sorry,
thanks.
I couldn't read. Yeah, understand the question.
There's a very nice point you were making about the composition of the sampradaya and how today, I was going to actually make this comment, and then you said it at the end about how there are lots of other different lineages that constitute the Nath sampradaya that are not included today in the sort of in the prescriptive, the Bharapant of the Mahasabha. But as you pointed out, it's quite confusing. It's strange that we've got this Vairag Panth, the very as you said, it's the most Islamic of the various lineages outside of the Bharapant, and then you've got a very Hindu Vairag Panth within. I mean, I'm wondering if you've got any guesses or any ideas as to how that came about. Do you think the Vairag Panth is split in some way? Do you think certain elements of it sort of broke away and made themselves more Hindu? Or do you think that you almost implied perhaps that the Mahasabha has sort of made up a new, more Hindu Vairag Panth? I mean, I was wondering how you think that might have come about.
I'm not able to see. I haven't got any proofs to state historically that this shift of identities happened within the group and the Mahasabha. But I just wanted to bring this to the notice of all, that this is the case. There are 2 groups which are present around the Sampradaya. One is there very very much in the center and accepted by the Sampradaya, whereas one is on the outskirts. Previously, it was part of the Sampradaya because it influenced a lot of miniatures and the text. But they are right at the gate of the monastery, but they are never allowed to enter. So with this, I think it proves a point that they are not at this state accepted in the monastery and in the Sampradaya. So I don't have any clear proofs to state, but this is the case with these two groups and how this historical shift happened.
Mute. Sorry, good. Someone muted me. I'm afraid the telephone rang. Oh gosh, hang on 1 sec. Decline. I'm very sorry about that. 1 sec. Girls, will someone answer my telephone?
If I have the time, may I ask if anyone in the audience knows about the Jangam Bairagis or the Jangam Yogis and their presence in the Mughal worldview? Because that is one area I'm completely stuck at. And since nobody's asking a question now, so
Well,
I
we do have a couple of questions on Slido, but yes, if anyone knows the answer to that question,
yeah,
if you pop,
because,
how about this? If you put a comment on the Slido with your name, we can pull you up. Let's try that. Let's see if anyone's got an answer to that for you. That would be fantastic.
Because I'm working on this Mughal manuscript and it has the presence of the Jangams, and I'm completely stuck. So I was thinking I should grab this opportunity of asking.
You never know.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Dr. Gulia, I had to dash off. So what your question was about the Jangams. There's been, because it's complicated, the connection between them and the Veerashaiva Jangama tradition, because there seems to be a separate North Indian tradition, doesn't there? But I have got some resources on that I'll let you know later on. Sorry, the perils of Zoom things with things going on at home. We have got a few questions on the Slido as well. I've obviously got more questions, but I should let other people have their say. And you mentioned Lubomir a few times. It's good we've got him in the audience, and he's got a couple of questions. So if we can go to Lubomir, please.
Yeah. Good morning to Shimla, early morning to Shimla, and thanks for your exciting talk. I would have a couple of questions, but now I would like to ask two. And the first one is about the dogs. You mentioned we have seen one miniature with dogs, and I wonder, do the dogs accompany exclusively Nath yogis or other persons or other yogis too? So can we take the presence of a dog as a clear proof that the yogi is a Nath, or it could be any Shaiva ascetic? Or can you tell us more about this point?
Yeah, I think the best person to answer this would be Dr. Mallinson, because my work draws from his observation, and he has in his studies mentioned that the dogs were distinctly associated with the Nath yogis and not with the Ramanandis, because they are considered as their presence was considered as pollutant. And you can add to this.
Well, yeah, I'd
I'd
agree. I think in the paintings that seems to be the case. Although I do, well, certainly today there are some Ramanandis I know who do have dogs as well. But I think because there's the association, isn't there, between Bhairava, who is often depicted with 4 dogs, and I think because of that. But I think the general rule is only Naths, but of course there are always exceptions.
Okay, thank you. Because as you said, it's related to Bhairava, so I think it might be, in fact, any Shaiva ascetic, and I wonder why exclusively Natha. That's my question. Yeah.
In the Mughal paintings, they are clearly associated with the Naths and not with any other yogis or ascetics. So that is how I identified that yogi as a Nath.
Okay, thank you. And if I may ask one more question, it's because I'm hunting some yogis in East India, as you know from my last lecture, my last talk, and I wonder whether you whether you came across any in Mughal miniature paintings from Eastern India. Did you encounter any yogis in these paintings produced, let's say, in Murshidabad or in this area? I mean, in Bengal.
Murshidabad, there are later paintings, but
Yes,
I could not get the black and white, the colored slides, so I didn't include it in my presentation. I could find the falling yogi who is fainted before the princess or the heroine. That aspect has been catered to in the Murshidabad paintings.
Okay.
And of course, the Rag and Ragini paintings, which include the depiction of the Rag Bhairav, those paintings are also there in Murshidabad.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Yeah, I hope.
Okay, great. We've got a few more questions on the Slido. Next one's been up for a bit, an anonymous question, so I'll read it out. And it's, can you tell us more about the instruments that can be identified? Are specific instruments included because they are common in Bhakti music of the times? And you asked the question, didn't you, about that sort of flat box shaped one? And I'm really, I know next to nothing. I'm very ignorant about musical instruments, but I did sort of recognize that from somewhere, and I wouldn't be surprised if you asked a specialist, they'd probably be able to recognize it. But yes, okay. So the question is, do you know more about the instruments that were depicted? Oh, hang on, sorry, sorry, just to butt in, I see that Kush has added a comment saying, do you think the box-shaped instrument in the mirrored paintings might be a portable tanpura? So yeah, I think that sounds like the one I was thinking of.
Okay, thank you so much for the advice. I'll definitely look for the tanpura one and try to figure out whether it is there and its presence there in that painting. Thank you, that's really kind. With respect to instruments, in the paintings only kengris are shown with these bairagis, but in the contemporary times they use iktara and the sarangi to play their songs. So I hope I've answered it.
Yeah, there's probably a whole field of research there, isn't there, in yogi instruments we opened up.
And like it all started from Rudraveena, perhaps, like, and eventually there are different stages of these instruments.
Great. We've got a question from Ruth Wexterby as well, if we could go to her, please.
Hi, thank you so much for that talk, Dr. Duhan. That was fabulous.
I'm glad you liked it.
Well, it was so gorgeous. I just wondered, I don't know anything at all about Mrgavati, but I wondered about the association with the moon that you were talking about, and whether there's sort of, that's cultural associations or particular yogic body associations that might be going on there.
Ruth, would you please repeat your questions, because some parts were not clear to me.
It was about Mrgavati and the association with the moon.
Okay, Mrgavati.
And I wondered whether it was cultural or yogic body.
Perhaps it's with both, because I'm not very much familiar with the Sanskrit terminologies, but Mrgavati or Mrigang, these are words associated with the moon. And so there is always this literary connections between the two, and it also depends, it also pointed towards the yogic body, and because the names were also of their cities were also placed in this manner as Kanchanpur and Chandrapur, suggesting the two stations in the body. So I think it pointed towards both the things.
Okay, thank you. Now I'm going to, I know it's about 1:30 in the morning for you or something, so we've really kept you up much too late. Thank you. So I've got one more question. This will be your last question. We're not going to keep you up any later. But I was just, I wasn't quite clear what you saw the relationship between the Dhaja or Dhwaja Panthis and these Ramta Vairagis, or whether you think that the Dhaja Panthis kind of changed into them, were absorbed into them, or whether they were different lineages. I just if you could just say about that.
Mm.
They were different musical, well, I don't know, anyway. Yeah.
I don't think the Dajpantis ever played any musical instruments. Like, we don't see any of those in their hands. And I mean, those were perhaps itinerant ascetics, and they were carrying these banners. But the Bhrathari Ramta Panthis, they were definitely musical. They had a musical background, and they used to play music and travel around the regions of North India. So, like, they don't have any connection with respect to music, but both of them were itinerant ascetics.
Okay, so
That's
that was the
how I
connection.
feel.
They're both Ramtad yogis. Okay,
Yeah,
and so, and sorry, I got what very final question then. So the Dajpantis, so the only current evidence you found of them is in Beawar, this exorcism sort of lineage. They were outside of the Mahasabha. And other than that,
Bankar has also referred to these yogis there, but they are the believers of Hanuman, but kind of
yes,
they have sidetracked a bit, and now they're more into exorcism and these kind of rites. Perhaps because they got influenced. What I think was that they got influenced from the Mehndipur Balaji temple, and in order to attract the devotees, or so perhaps due to this they have sidetracked.
Okay, well, great. Well, thank you so much. I'm amazed that you're still coherent at 1:30 in the morning after all that. You must have picked up some siddhi from reading all these